back in. Welcome back in. Today we're going to be discussing our top 36 fantasy wide receivers to get you ready for your upcoming fantasy drafts that are coming here in the next couple of weeks. Really, I mean, season starts in 3 weeks, which is wild to me. Where time gone, but football is almost back. Preseason is in full swing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Our wide receiver ones are as followed. I have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Cup, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, and Devonta Smith. Cody, you have Justin Jefferson, Cooper Cup, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson, and T. Higgins. So without further ado, Cody, hit us with the good stuff.
First of all, man, I just have to say how happy it makes me to see you having Amon-Ra St. Brown up there at 6. I love it, man. I'm here for it. Obviously, if you leave your draft with any of these 12 wide receivers, your first 2 rounds, whether you take 2, you only take one of them, you're feeling good. We don't need to really talk about a bunch of these guys, in too far in depth. But I just kind of wanted to remind everyone of the absolute tear that Cooper Cup was on last year. He's starting to climb back up a little bit. He's kind of like wide receiver 3 or 4, for the most part in consensus in terms of ADP. But I think he should be in discussion for the 101 overall ahead of Justin Jefferson. I mean, we're talking about a guy who just was literally setting records 2 years ago, and he was on that same pace once again last year before everything started to fall apart for the Rams between him going down and also Stafford getting injured. But in the 8 games that Kupp played with Stafford last year, he was averaging almost 12 targets per game, 9 catches, almost 102 yards, and 0.8 touchdowns per game. So he was almost averaging a touchdown per game over those first 8 games that he played with Stafford. That comes out to an average of 25.1 PPR points per game for his average. Had he kept that up for the entire year, that would have put him as the 3rd overall player last year, only behind Jalen Hurts and Patty Mahomes. So like I said, he should be in consideration for the 101. We don't need to talk about him a bunch because he's still a stud. I just want to remind people of the pace that he was on for what could have been another record-setting year.
He was an absolute baller last year. For me, when it comes to a lot of these guys, like I mentioned, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he truly is a dark horse, and he should be mentioned in the same light as the top 5 wide receivers. That's how good I think he is going to be this year. He has been fantastic over the first 2 years in the league. I think heading into this season, the situation is very similar. There's not a lot of target competition. You have rookie Sam Laporta. You have Jameson Williams, who's going to be out for the first 6 weeks, and who has had a very rough training camp this season. And then that's really it. Then you have Marvin fucking Jones and Josh Reynolds behind him, and there's nobody else there to take targets away from him, in the receiving room. And so I think that he is going to see a massive amount of targets, and he's kind of playing that Cooper Cup role that Jared Goff experienced with Cooper Cup. And so, I just love Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is in that elite echelon of wide receivers, something he really has been working on this year because he's been a very short intermediate route type guy. He is a terrific yards after catch player, but he's really been working on a more nuanced route tree, working in some 9 routes, stuff like that. If we can get him to go deep, and now you're starting to get deep targets for Amon-Ra St. Brown, wheels up, boys and girls, because that's really the only thing that's missing out of his game. You can guarantee him, lock him in, write it down for 100 plus receptions this year. And so I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I feel like I've talked about so much about him, but he's the other guy. In the second round, if I can get anybody, I want Amon-Ra St. Brown and I want or Tony Pollard. Those are the 2 guys that I absolutely want. Nick Chubb is included in that group, but those are the 3 really that I absolutely want in the second round. And it feels like stealing being able to get your hands on those guys. So I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then, so a couple of these other wide receivers going in this range as well. Jalen Waddle, I think, is also a really interesting option last season. And it's really impressive, actually, what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both did last season because Tua Tagovailoa was in and out of the lineup with concussions, dealing with injuries last year. I think if you can get a full season of Tua this year and he can stay healthy, I think Tyreek Hill could push for 2,000 yards this year receiving. He had 1,700 of them last year. And I don't think it's hot at all. And Jalen Waddle was fantastic. A much limited amount of targets for him last year. I think he had less than 120, but he still was a top 10 wide receiver last year. And so I really like that offense in terms of Miami. I think either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle are two guys that I definitely want to try to get a target as well in the first round. So I think the first round, there's a lot of wide receivers here that I like. Now, once you get past that, now we start to get a lot of question marks. Past the wide receiver ones, I think you start getting to really a lot of question marks here with some of these dudes. So let's go ahead and jump over. You have Chris Olave, T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin, Brandon Cooks, Deontay Johnson, and Christian Watson. And then Cody, you have Devonta Smith, Amari Cooper, Chris Olave, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, Christian Watson, Mike Williams, and Deebo Samuel. So, Cody, why don't you talk to us about some of these wide receiver twos?
Similar to Cooper Cup, I just want to remind everyone again of Calvin Ridley and what a stud that he is. And obviously his hype has been taking off in training camp, and I think it's absolutely warranted. I could probably, I probably will move him up after seeing this. I'm going to tinker with these rankings a little bit, but the last time that we saw Ridley play a full season, he was 10th in target shares, second in air yard share, 11th in average depth of target, second in red zone targets, and was wide receiver 4 in points per game. Now, obviously, I don't think he sees that same type of market share across any of those stats in this Jags offense, since there are other legit options. But we've heard nothing but good things coming out of Jags camp in terms of how he looks. He moves different than any other wide receiver on the team. He's already building that rapport of Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence looks like he's ready to take the next step forward. Being in the second year of the Doug Peterson offense is obviously going to help him out as well. So all this is lining up beautifully for a Calvin Ridley renaissance, and I am here for it. And the other guy I just want to touch on real quickly is Michael Pittman. He kind of fits the bill this year as the post-hype sleeper. Last year, he was someone that a lot of people were excited about. Both of us were all about Michael Pittman last year. He goes out and he racks up 141 targets in an absolute dumpster fire of a season. Still somehow ended up as a back-end wide receiver 2 in points per game. And now people are jumping off the bandwagon. Now, one of the things that really stood out to me when I was looking over some of Pittman's numbers, he had 5 deep targets last year. 5. That's it. Just 5. His average depth of target dropped a full 2 yards compared to what it was in 2021. And now in walks Anthony Richardson, who has an absolute cannon. So, I don't think, we should see 140 targets again. I think it's going to be a little bit more run heavy, obviously, with Anthony Richardson and his ability as a runner as well. But I think, 120 is certainly within reach, as the unquestioned wide receiver 1 on that team. He's coming off the boards as wide receiver 33. I think it's a fantastic value. And like I said, I think if he can start to get back some of the more deep targets, getting closer to what he had in 2021, that's going to do wonders for his fantasy production. So Pittman is a guy that I am back on board with this year.
Talk dirty to me. I think there's some, because I have him as a wide receiver 3. I'm not as high on him, mainly because I just don't know how much his offense is going to throw the football. Last year, they were top 8 in pass attempts per game. I don't think they're going to be anywhere close to that. So I still think Michael Pittman, because this is a contract year for Michael Pittman. I believe he's a free agent after this year. So we'll see what they do there. But I think there's a lot of different directions this offense can go this year. I think there is the outside chance that Anthony Richardson hits the ground running early. He has already been named the week 1 starter, and he's been getting a lot of buzz and a lot of hype out of camp, and he looked pretty good in his first preseason action as well. And so, I think if he can be a much better passer than what we're expecting, then I think Michael Pittman could actually be a slam dunk for a lot of people and could end up finishing as like a high-end wide receiver 2 if things were to work out. For me, yeah. I think when it comes to the 2 guys I really want to talk about, I think for the most part, a lot of the names that I have in here are what people are going to have, maybe in some different order. But I want to talk about Brandon Cooks and Deontay Johnson, are 2 guys that I don't think anybody has as top 24 wide receivers, or at least you're not going to see it very often. One, Brandon Cooks, I just don't understand why he's not higher for most people. Heading into last year, he was wide receiver 2 on the goddamn Houston Texans with Davis Mills throwing him the football. Yes, he's the wide receiver 2 now on this offense in Dallas, but I think it's him and CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson is a guy that I think is an interesting late round tight end. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of other options here to throw the football to outside of Tony Pollard. And so he's going to see 100-plus targets in this offense. It's still a top 10 passing offense in the league. I don't think the pace is going to be quite as what it was last year with Kellen Moore gone. But I still think that there's a lot of room for a growth here for Brandon Cooks. And Brandon Cooks has produced everywhere he's gone. And I know he's getting a little bit higher up there in age. I think he's almost 29 years old. But I still think Brandin Cooks is at a fantastic spot, and he's going in like the eighth or ninth round. Like he's almost free at this point. What it feels like for what he should be going. One of the better offenses in the league. Brandin Cooks should be going higher, and so I have him as a wide receiver too. The other one's Deontay Johnson, and I get it. Deontay Johnson failed a lot of people last year. He wasn't fantastic at all. He had 140 targets. He scored 0 touchdowns last year. Some of that was Mitchell Trubisky. Some of that was Kenny Pickett being a rookie. The thing that I pull away from it more than anything is the target earner. Like he is still earning a ton of targets, and targets are earned, right? And so the 140 targets are, I think, is a very positive note for him last season. I actually think they could actually throw the ball a little bit more this year. I think there's been a lot of talk about Kenny Pickett looking a lot better in camp and having more command of this offense. And I don't love Matt Canada. I think he's a terrible offensive coordinator. I don't know why he's even still there, but other than that, like I think Deontay Johnson, he's definitely not going to score 0 touchdowns. Kind of feels like a Miles Sanders thing because that's what happened to Miles Sanders, 2 years ago. And then he bounced back and scored 13 touchdowns. Obviously, two different positions, but what I'm saying is positive regression is coming for Deontay Johnson. I know a lot of people prefer George Pickens. I don't mind George Pickens, but if you look at George Pickens' reception perception numbers, they were fucking terrible. Like he was awful in terms of a lot of those, especially against man. Like I think he had like a 10 percentile score against man last year. Like I still think George Pickens can be good, and I know George Pickens, coming off injuries and stuff like that. It was a rookie last season, and his year wasn't terrible. I think he had almost 800 receiving yards. But Deontay Johnson is a legitimate, really good wide receiver, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. But I think Deontay Johnson is pretty easily in line to be a wide receiver too. And where you can get Deontay Johnson is another tremendous value. I'm way ahead of ADP on him. So I just wanted to talk about those two guys. I think both of those guys deserve a little bit more love than what they've gotten. Let's move over to the wide receiver threes. I have Mike Williams, Christian Kirk, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins, Jordan Addison, Tyler Lockett, Sky Moore, Michael Pittman, and Marquise Brown. And you have Jerry Jeudy, Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Drake London, Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks, Marquise Brown, Mike Evans, and Juju Smith-Schuster. Cody, tell us about some wide receiver threes.
Yeah, man, you stole my thunder a little bit with Deontay Johnson. He was someone who I was going to talk about for basically all the reasons you said, but I just want to throw a little bit more on top. You mentioned the targets at 140, so he was 6th in raw targets, 13th in target share, 18th in air yard share, 10th in red zone targets, and still somehow had 0 touchdowns. He was also 2nd in unrealized air yards as well, just meaning obviously incomplete passes. So if that even just starts to tick up just a little bit, even if he can get, he's not going to come out, like you said, he's not going to go from 0 touchdowns up to double digits. He hasn't really been like a massive touchdown scorer throughout his career. But even if he can get to 5, 6 touchdowns, that's going to be huge for his fantasy potential. Some other names, I definitely need to get Sky Moore a little bit higher. I do have Jordan Addison. I love seeing that you have him in your top 36. I have him just outside. I'm still clinging on hope with Juju Smith-Schuster, as a back end wide receiver 3. I don't think he's going to have any sort of ceiling at all, and I'm sure that's why you don't have him in your top 36. But I think he could end up being in full PPR leagues. I think he could be like a safe option on a week to week basis. You're not going to want to throw him in one of like your actual wide receiver spots. But I think as like a flex option, if you need that safety blanket in your fantasy lineups, I think he's going to be just fine. We already talked about Calvin Ridley a little bit. I think Christian Kirk is maybe, I don't necessarily know that he's going a little too low, but I think it's going to be Kirk and Ridley and Evan Ingram in this offense. I think Zay Jones takes a step back, and it's really going to be Kirk and Ridley. So I think because of where he's going and because of the Ridley hype, that he makes a lot of sense this year too. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers, like I just don't know what to do with. Like I look at it now, I should probably bump Evans down, move Sky Moore up into 35. So it's probably a change I'm going to be making as soon as we stop recording. But some of these wide receiver threes, you've mentioned on a couple of shows that you always hear about people saying that wide receivers deep. You can wait on wide receivers, and you're still getting these great wide receivers later on in drafts. I don't believe that's the case this year. So if I can load up a little bit earlier this year and then wait and snag some guys later, round 8 or so later, then maybe have a little bit more upside. That's what I want to do in drafts this year.
In terms of the other wide receivers here, Jordan Addison, like you mentioned, I love this spot for him, the wide receiver 2 here for the Minnesota Vikings. I think this is an offense that's going to be top 10 in pass attempts, top 10 in pace. And so I think there's a lot to like with Jordan Addison. I think he is easily going to be the number 2 target earner behind Justin Jefferson. I know KJ Osborne is kind of, still there, but he's not something I'm worried about. And obviously TJ Hawkinson, I think it's going to be these 3 guys. And I love TJ Hawkinson this year as well. So I really like this Vikings passing offense. And so Jordan Addison, I think, is a pretty easy bet for me in terms of running routes from the slot. And I just think he's somebody that I really want to bet on. I probably could move him up even higher. I feel like I'll probably end up moving him ahead of guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Chris Godwin and Debo Samuel. And yes, I'm lower on DeAndre Hopkins than most people, but I just hate this Tennessee Titans offense. I just hate it. Treylon Burks, thankfully, avoided serious injuries. Only going to be out for a couple of weeks. He should be back. And there's just, I don't know. Like, I don't see a big volume here for him. Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. The offensive line is awful. Like, I don't know. I don't want any part of DeAndre Hopkins either. But I will say Sky Moore. Like, I love Sky Moore. More and more, I think it comes out that he really is going to be, I think, he's going to be like the number 1 wide receiver in this offense, right? I know MVS is there, but he just runs a lot of wind sprints down the field. He's not a target earner. Rashee Rice, as much as I think that there's potential there in the long term, this year I just don't see it unless other injuries were to occur. And then you have like Justin Ross, who's gained a lot of buzz, and I think he actually makes this roster, and I think he's going to be a part of this team and could have some like late season like appeal, maybe a waiver wire guy. But Sky Moore is going to be running the same routes that Juju Smith-Schuster did. He's going to be playing from the slot, and we saw last year that obviously Juju was able to be a top 36 wide receiver in this offense. Even over the last 4 or 5 weeks, he ended up suffering a knee injury, so he kind of fell off. His numbers could have been even a little bit better. And so I think Sky Moore is certainly the guy that I want to target. It's not Kadarius Toney. It's not MVS. It's not Rashee Rice. It's Sky Moore. And Sky Moore's ADP is still really reasonable. I think he's going like 9th, 10th round in most drafts. So I love both of these guys. Sky Moore, I think, takes a big step forward this year, bounces back from kind of the rough season he had last year. And you know what? You don't have to spend a lot to get him anyway. So it's not like you're spending all this heavy draft capital to find out. That being said, I think there are some other, some very intriguing wide receivers that are outside of the top 36 here. But, I don't know. I don't think we really need to get too far into it. But I think guys like Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, like all of these types of wide receivers are going to be the wide receivers that I'm going to want that are outside of here that I'm going to be looking to target in the mid to later rounds that I think have a lot of upside as well. So that being said, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button for future content. We'll see you on the next one.